This storm will be quite ferocious, in fact, very dangerous for parts of the eastern United States as we head towards this weekend, with some extreme impacts anticipated, especially if you follow the European model. Speaking of the models, I'll have model differences, detail you on the severe potential, as well as wind and snow impacts and regional timeline in this video, so stick around. Alright, here's a system overview from the European model. Let's go ahead and see what's bringing this along. We've got a trough that's going to be connected with a low pressure system that's going to come out of the Rockies. We're going to see some decent snowfall. In fact, quite considerable accumulation of some snowfall, maybe even some, mountainous issues here with some slippery terrain there into parts of the higher elevations there in the Four Corners as the system moves on through, but especially there into parts of Colorado, coming out of Idaho as well as Utah. You can see that's going to push, southeastward into the plains, and we're going to see this system begin to materialize over the eastern U.S. and the central U.S. at least here by the time we get into our late Saturday and into our Sunday, with the potential for severe storms on the southern end, maybe some snowfall as well into parts of the upper Midwest as well as the Great Lakes. Although the snow is not necessarily going to be the greatest impact we see out of this system, you can see we continue to see this move on off towards the north and east as we make our way into our Sunday morning time frame. With, again, this is one model, the European model. You can see the tightly packed isobars indicating very strong winds, and then of course very cool air trying to rush on in behind this quickly, and that's going to be what pushes this line along. But look at how this low pressure system really just turns into a massive piece of energy as it heads northeastward with that scenario. In fact, that is called bombogenesis, if you can get that pressure to drop rapidly enough in such a quick period of time. But anyway, here with the GFS model, you see a very similar scenario. Although the low pressure doesn't look to bomb out quite as much, you can still see how the impacts get dragged through parts of the eastern U.S., especially there through the northeastern quadrant, with less impacts down there towards parts of, say, Florida and the Gulf Coast, at least towards the end of the system after it heads northeastward and far enough into Canada where the energy gets pulled that way as well. So the key model difference that I wanted you to see here is that the GFS is favoring a slightly slower and more north side heavy system, while the Euro shows this being a very heavy system for pretty much everyone that sees it east of parts of the plains especially, and that does include severe weather with a day 5 severe weather risk, including parts of the Arklatex region for us here, southeast Oklahoma, eastern Texas just east of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, on over into northern Louisiana, parts of southern Arkansas, as well as western Mississippi, getting in on that level 2 risk for now, but a risk upgrade is certainly possible as we get closer in time. Now you can see this trough really begin to curl back on against itself. That's what we're talking about, a neutral trough here turning negatively tilted at this point. Leave a comment, by the way, if you have any feedback or questions for me, but you can see how this trough really begins to flatten on out. That's when it looks like it is, straight up and down. It goes away from that U shape. We begin to see it curl like what I'm drawing on your screen, and then eventually it tilts so much that it's actually looking like it's pointing back in the direction it came from. And look at how that happens here right as it moves through the southern end of the United States and during that severe weather potential zone. That could create the potential for some swirling winds with height there as we see some of that rotation going on in different levels of the atmosphere, and that could continue on off towards the northeast. So we'll have to see if other ingredients can get in play that far north, but we know we're going to have the moisture, especially here over that south central zone that has the severe risk already highlighted. Dew points in the 50s, the 60s, pretty much the mid-60s here over the Arklatex, which is well into that zone that you need to support severe storms. But notice we've got this chain of dew points that go at least into the 50s here over parts of the Midwest, moving into Indiana, Ohio, with the more northerly track low that we've begun to see with both the GFS and the Euro model. That could certainly bring the chance for at least some isolated to scattered severe weather to move on up as far north as parts of the Ohio Valley here. You can see those dew points in the 60s through the Carolinas with this system with the Euro model, and then notice how some of those dew points in the 50s and 60s make it as far north as New England states, and once again that could be what is a factor that drags in some severe weather potential even as far north as some of those zones. Alright, now let's take a look at the storm energy. You can see moving into parts of the Arklatex here on our Saturday morning. As early as that time frame, we could have some moderate levels of instability. Anything in the blue is really where we've got decent enough instability to support some significant severe storms. So again, we're pretty much checking that area off. All the ingredients should be in place, and that's why the Storm Prediction Center has already outlined those zones. But it's going to be eastward from there where things get a little bit more uncertain. Where will we have energy? But you can see at least a piece of some broken energy could make it as far north as parts of Missouri, into Kentucky. We'll see this on up into Illinois, Indiana, maybe parts of Ohio as well, getting in on at least a thin band of some energy with the storm. The wind energy will be abundant with the storm as it moves eastward. We don't have to really worry about a damaging wind threat. In fact, damaging winds could come from non-thunderstorm threats here. Just overall, the storm could produce enough wind to knock down trees and power lines here. And then we continue to see and that energy push on east through the Carolinas, maybe a thin sliver of it making it up into the northeast. But overall, right now, I'm not changing my thoughts that much on what I'm expecting with the severe certainty with this event from what I initially said, which was yesterday on Monday. You can see here over parts of the plains heading eastward into parts of the northeastern United States. That's where we've got the overall zone. But the best chance for severe weather is beginning to expand a little bit over the mid-south, but primarily there into parts of Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas is where I'm expecting the best chance. Heading on over into Tennessee, Kentucky, parts of the southwestern Ohio Valley. That's some of the areas that I've added, as well as heading on over to the Panhandle of Florida and all the way to Tampa Bay, where a potential southern end of the line could produce a tornado threat there. Now with our wind gusts potential here, 30, 40 mile per hour wind gusts surging over parts of the central United States into our Sunday early morning. You can see overall the wind gust potential has decreased just a little bit here in the models over parts of the south central United States, but still some 30, 40 mile per hour gusts pushing on through. It's once this system really begins to bomb out over the eastern United States, that's when we're really going to begin to see those winds kick up. This is when this is going to drop from, 1,000 millibar tropical storm, quote-unquote, level low here to a Category 2 level low. Now, obviously, this isn't going to be producing Category 2 winds, but the pressure will be that of a Category 2 hurricane likely by the time this finishes dropping that pressure rapidly. We could see some 60 mile per hour wind gusts in this zone I'm circling right here if this Euromodel scenario plays out. The GFS does also have 60 mile per hour wind gusts, but just keeps it out of places like Carolinas and Virginia, keeps it further north into the areas the Euromodel is pushing it into now. Into our Monday, looking like with both models we could see some extreme, maybe up to hurricane force wind gusts entering parts of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York City. We could see this in Albany, New York, Binghamton, Vermont, all these areas. You could see 50, 60, 70 mile per hour wind gusts. And remember, this is not in a thunderstorm. You could have thunderstorms that could crank out similar winds or higher if severe weather can make it that far north. Again, that's still to be determined. So there's still a lot of stuff to iron out. But if you get 50, 60 mile per hour wind gusts for even 6 hours just sustained from this system here, those gust levels, that could certainly knock down trees and power lines and cause, pretty long-lasting issues in some spots. Your system's snowfall here, overall the snowfall potential has dropped a little bit. A thin stripe exiting Kansas and into parts of the Midwest and Great Lakes, maybe 4 to 6 inches along that. And then maybe if we can get enough cold air to wrap back around, we could get some brief snowfall at the tail end as well in parts of the upper Midwest and the Great Lakes, which is a little bit of a new addition to the potential forecast there. So let's finish off here with some regional timeline, then we'll recap and finish this video on up. Don't leave yet though. You can see we've got over parts of Memphis, Tennessee back on down into parts of southern Louisiana. We've got these two areas, we could see some supercells here right along that Gulf Coast zone, but this is where I am expecting severe weather to be at one of its most prominent times throughout this entire event into our early Sunday morning here over parts of Louisiana, Arkansas, parts of Mississippi as well, maybe again in western Tennessee as well. We begin to see that slowly head on off towards the east. By the time we go into our Sunday morning though, I think you'll mostly be cleared out by the time the sun rises there. It'll be in the early morning when most of that worst weather occurs in those zones. With your Ohio Valley overall zone, here we go. This is mid to late afternoon on your Saturday. Maybe a potential, squall line with some 60, 70 mile per hour wind gusts pushing through parts of eastern Missouri as well as eastern Arkansas. You can see how this is pretty much the northern extent of that band that this low pressure produces along its cold front. Now again, this is just a possibility, but I'm showing you the GFS here because I'm trying to prove to you now that the GFS is also jumping on board with the potential of a more northerly event as well with this, which is something that the Euro was showing yesterday, but not necessarily the GFS. But also notice the GFS is going just a little bit faster with some of this pushing on over into northern Alabama, central Tennessee, and Kentucky as early as, midnight Saturday night into Sunday morning. Quickly moving into parts of the Carolinas, Virginia, into our, the dawn time frame on Sunday morning. That could lower the severe threat into some of those zones, without any sort of daytime heating. But nonetheless, if we get enough southerly push, we could still get severe weather into some of those zones, as I showed you earlier, with the low threat and low certainty, at least pushing eastward as far northeast as New England. And in fact, speaking of New England and the northeastern states, that's the last zone I really want to time out here. You can see that we're going to begin to see this really move on in very late Saturday night into our Sunday, but overall it's going to be midday Sunday and onward when we see this push into parts of Pennsylvania, New York, especially if you go with that Euro model. This is the GFS though. You can see that right along that line we could be seeing some severe storms. We could be seeing some very strong winds. Remember, both models have 50, 60 mile per hour wind gusts dialing in on this region, so you need to be especially prepared there. We could have snow wrapping back around on the back end of this as well into parts of western New York. It could be 60 in those storms in eastern New York, 30 in those storms closer to Buffalo. That would be some crazy stuff if we saw that really materialize there, but not necessarily uncommon for this time of the year with cold fronts as they move on through. Notice we continue to see, this line of convection head on off towards the northeast. Again, probably some thunder at least embedded in this as this low really tightens on up and we see gusty winds along this, and we continue to see this push on through Maine. Most of the worst weather should be exiting on Monday here across this region. So really for this worst of this weather expected parts of Saturday night into our Sunday here over parts of the South Central and the Midwest. We begin to see that shift eastward, sometime late Saturday night into Sunday over parts of Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, back on down through the Mid-South, entering the Southeast and Mid-Atlantic on Sunday, and then looking like it'll be pushing on off towards the Northeast at the end, with very heavy rainfall anywhere from an inch or two over many areas here. So if you don't see snowfall, expect at least an inch of rain for pretty much everyone. Some spots here in some of these purple stripes that you see, again, these aren't going to be exactly in place yet, but we could see some 2 to 4 inch totals as well get going that could trigger some flooding. Of course, I'll be keeping you posted in the next several days with new graphics. I'll be coming out with new timeline graphics. I'll be coming out with new forecasts, so go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe, turn on the notifications, leave any comments and feedback you have below, and that's the end of this video. Have a great day.
One Nation Web.